pounds.
Just about ready to begin. Round one. This time, the championship is in
Skating the rosin, Max Schmeling standing calmly, getting last word from Buck Casey.
There's the buzzer, the 10-second warning, and here's the internationally famous Slovak co-announcer Tom Benfica. Thank you, Harry Kern. Good evening, everyone.
Na história do boxe, sempre houve muitos campeões e várias categorias de peso. Mas no decorrer das décadas, um grupo de boxeadores fascinou o mundo: os pesos pesados. No século XX, houve muitos campeões dos pesos pesados, mas sempre existem aqueles que se destacam. Homens que cativaram o público dentro e fora do ringue. Esses homens foram homenageados em suas gerações. Acima de tudo, eles se tornaram lendas eternas. Os Reis do Ringue. 4 lendas dos pesos pesados.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have been requested by many to tell just how I knocked out so many of my opponents. As far as I'm concerned, that day has gone. And today, I have a new way in knocking them out. And I will show you.
Este é Jack Johnson, um dos lutadores mais polêmicos da história do boxe. Muitos o consideram o melhor peso pesado de todos os tempos, no mesmo nível de Jack Dempsey, Joe Louis e Muhammad Ali. Em 26 de dezembro de 1908, após tentar conquistar um título, o desejo dele se realizaria em uma luta contra Tommy Burns em Sydney, Austrália. Johnson bate tanto em Burns que no 14º assalto, com Burns prestes a ser nocauteado, a polícia interrompe as filmagens. Poucos segundos após esta cena, o árbitro interrompe a luta. Jack Johnson é o campeão mundial dos pesos pesados.
He was the first black title holder. He also went up with white women. He taunted his white opponents. He was very bold. He followed Tommy Burns all the way to Australia to force him to fight him. When he won, he kind of boasted. And it was felt in the United States and other white countries that Jack Johnson represented something very evil.
O escritor Jack London abriu a luta para o New York Herald. A crítica dele foi feroz, deixando claro sua indignação por um negro ter vencido um branco. Ele clamou por uma esperança branca, o ex-campeão Jim Jeffries, que havia se aposentado sem derrotas 3 anos antes na Califórnia. London escreveu: "Uma coisa é certa, Jim Jeffries precisa sair de sua fazenda e acabar com o sorriso dourado de Jack Johnson. Jeff, você decide." A menção do sorriso dourado de Johnson não foi mal interpretada. Ele havia substituído os dentes da frente por dentes de ouro.
This is the Jack London we all grew up loving, reading White Fang and Call of the Wild and all such things. There were all kinds of racist songs composed and played in dance halls and burlesque places in praise of Jeffries. It was vicious press about Jack Johnson. This was yet another one of those times where history and boxing, and specifically the heavyweight championship, intersected in the most interesting and electrifying way.
Os Estados Unidos atenderam ao chamado de Jack London. O clamor por um campeão branco, uma esperança branca, tomou conta do país.
You had rodeo riders and gandy dancers and track walkers and circus freaks all showing up to become the white champion. It was a promoter's dream. Everybody was a white champion.
No ano seguinte à conquista do título, Johnson foi desafiado pelo peso médio Stanley Catchell, o assassino do Michigan. Catchell, considerado o melhor dos pesos médios, tinha 15 quilos a menos que Johnson, mas seu soco era poderoso. Durante 11 assaltos, Catchell teve um desempenho corajoso. No 12º assalto, Catchell surpreende a todos, nocauteando Johnson. Em pouco tempo, Catchell percebe o erro que cometeu. Johnson se levanta e o acerta com a direita no maxilar. A luta termina. A carreira de Catchell terminaria um ano depois, quando ele foi assassinado aos 24 anos de idade. Johnson se gabava de suas vitórias e o país mais uma vez clamou por Jim Jeffries. Por fim, Jeffries cedeu. Ele concordou em voltar e lutar pela honra da raça branca. 5 anos após se aposentar, Jeffries, de terno cinza e boina branca, entra no ringue. No canto de Jeffries, incentivando-o, está o ex-campeão James J. Corbett, uma lenda do boxe. Antes da luta, Jim disse: "O rapaz negro pode amarelar, e Jeffries fará isso no ringue." Quando a luta começa, Corbett grita insultos para Johnson. A cada insulto, Johnson revida no rosto e no corpo de Jeffries. Entre socos, Johnson continuava instigando Corbett.
Johnson spent half his time saying, "Come on in, Mr. Jim, you want the same thing. You want some of this? Come on in, Mr. Jim. You're next." He really didn't care. He could have beaten everybody in the crowd that afternoon.
A luta teria 45 assaltos, mas no 12º assalto está claro que Jeffries não é mais o mesmo. Os 5 anos de aposentadoria e os 45 quilos que perdeu o deixam em desvantagem. No 15º assalto, Johnson decide encerrar a luta. Ele manda o exausto Jeffries para a lona e o manda levantar. Johnson o derruba novamente. Era a primeira vez que Jeffries era derrubado em sua carreira. Jeffries está acabado. Indo contra as regras, o assistente o ajuda a levantar. Jeffries está liquidado. Para não ver o ídolo sendo derrotado, Jim Corbett manda o árbitro encerrar a luta. Divulgada pela imprensa, a vitória de Johnson provoca protestos por todo o país.
It was not so distant from slave times and Reconstruction. There were riots in every major city that one could think of. The minute the news of Jack Johnson's victory was announced.
Todos queriam vingança. Se não havia uma esperança branca para derrotar Johnson, o sistema judiciário americano tornou-se uma alternativa conveniente. Johnson foi condenado por cruzar uma fronteira estadual com uma mulher com objetivos imorais. Para não ser preso, ele fugiu do país.
Jack Johnson was one of the most culturally sophisticated figures in the history of boxing. Knew about music and theater and had a taste for fine wines and spoke French and Spanish and read widely. He was very sophisticated.
Sem poder lutar nos Estados Unidos, Johnson colocou seu título em disputa em Havana, Cuba, contra Jess Willard, de 2 metros de altura. Johnson, aos 37 anos, não é mais o mesmo. Willard o nocauteia no 26º assalto. Depois, Johnson disse que entregou a luta, como prova a foto em que ele protege os olhos do sol enquanto o árbitro faz a contagem. Poucos especialistas acreditam na história dele. Por fim, em 1920, 5 anos após perder o título, Johnson voltou aos Estados Unidos e se entregou às autoridades. Ele passou 8 meses na prisão. Johnson se aposentou do boxe em 1928, aos 50 anos de idade.
Jack Johnson just was what society couldn't take. A burr under its Victorian saddle. Jack Johnson loved to beat the white man, to infuriate the writers, to race cars at outrageous speeds, to open a club Cafe Chicago that served liquor anytime, anywhere, anyhow, all against the law. And just to go on as merry, having a good time in a society that wasn't given to a good time before World War I. It was a tight-corseted, tight-lipped, tight-ass society.
Em 1946, Johnson morreu em um acidente de carro aos 68 anos, quando ia assistir à luta entre Joe Louis e Billy Conn. Ele perdeu o controle do carro e bateu em um poste telefônico. Um repórter escreveu depois: Jack Johnson morreu ao cruzar a linha branca pela última vez.
Jack Johnson was a big inspiration because of what he did out of the ring. He was so bold. Jack Johnson was a black man back when white people lynched Negroes on weekends, every weekend. Back in 1909, they would send him letters saying, "You fighting a white man, and nigger, if you knock him out, we'll kill you." He said, "Just kill my black buggers, I'm gonna knock this white man cold." And he would knock the white man out, and the Ku Klux Klan would be burning them. They killed Negroes all over the country. When Jack Johnson wanted to fight, they had riots all over South America. It was so serious. And Jack Johnson, he's bad. He had to be a bad, bad black man. Wasn't no black Muslims to defend him. Wasn't no NAACP in 1909. Wasn't no Rap Brown. Wasn't no MOVE, all these black groups. Wasn't no Angela Davis, no Hill Newton, no Malcolm X. He was by himself. Jack Johnson. It was so long ago, people still had log cabins in this country, and they rode horses and wagons and stagecoaches to fight. He was one black man in the midst of all them rednecks would kill lynch Negroes every day. He would dress up in pretty suits. Negroes are allowed to dress up in days. He put on pretty white neckties and pretty white, and had white women. You know that nigga was bold. He married white women. You would get lynched for looking at a white woman in them days. That man married white women and walked around, took pictures with his white women. Married two of them, and they even run him out of the country because of white woman. He left the whole country and fought out of Cuba. He was bad. Back in 1909, man. Man, you know, Jack Johnson was the greatest. He had to be the greatest. Wasn't no Black Panthers, wasn't no bodyguards, white people, lynching nigga, wasn't no television, wasn't no telephone. And that nigga was doing all this stuff in them days. He was bad when you think about it. I know I'm bad, but he was crazy.
(4 de julho de 1919). A Primeira Guerra Mundial acabou há menos de 8 meses e os Estados Unidos comemoram os 143 anos da Declaração da Independência com piqueniques e desfiles. Mesmo assim, milhões de pessoas estarão esperando notícias de Toledo, Ohio, sobre a luta entre o campeão Jesse Willard, que nocauteara Jack Johnson 4 anos antes, e o desafiante de 24 anos, de Manassas, Colorado, Jack Dempsey, o matador de Manassas. Na maioria dos Estados Unidos, era proibido lutar por dinheiro, mas o promotor Tex Rickard acreditava que a popularidade do esporte entre civis e soldados superaria o protesto dos reformadores que tentavam proibir o boxe.
There is no doubt that Tex Rickard has put together one of the great fights of all time in one respect. He has got a challenger there who is a tiger-eating fighter. Dempsey had taken care of the two challengers ahead of him in 25 and 38 seconds, both in the first round, earning his right to face Willard. And still the promoter of the fight, Tex Rickard, feared for Dempsey. Willard had already killed a man. He actually went into Willard's room and told him, "Be careful, don't hurt him."
Tex Rickard mandou construir um estádio de madeira com 97 mil lugares. Na manhã da luta, os espectadores chegaram cedo. Como era de praxe, o cinturão dos pesos pesados é exibido e Willard e Dempsey posam para os fotógrafos. Willard é 13 centímetros mais alto do que Dempsey e 27 quilos mais pesado. Além disso, Willard nunca foi nocauteado em 8 anos de carreira. A temperatura no ringue é de 43 graus. Ambos preveem nocautes, mas sem que Willard saiba, o empresário de Dempsey, Doc Kearns, quer que a luta acabe logo. Kearns apostou $10 mil que Dempsey nocautearia Willard no primeiro assalto. Nos primeiros segundos, Dempsey ataca o adversário.
Dempsey came out and he fought from a crouch, almost a panther-like crouch. And after about a minute, he sprung up with the left hand and caught Willard on the jaw.
A multidão se surpreende quando Willard cai pela primeira vez na carreira. Ao contrário de hoje, as regras do boxe em 1919 não exigiam que o boxeador fosse para um canto neutro.
The Dempsey-Jess Willard fight would have been stopped in the first round today. Jess Willard is knocked down repeatedly. He gets up and he's knocked down. It's grotesquely comic. This very tall man, he's like a giant. And Dempsey would crouch and go low, and he was sort of like a force of nature. Boxing was more of a gentleman's sport before Dempsey. And Dempsey had this sort of sensual approach where he basically wanted to kill his opponent and rush across the ring, and people had never seen anything quite like that before.
He went after Jess Willard right away, like a black panther on a huge elephant. He got right on him, and he I don't think Willard hit Dempsey once. No, he just went after him, and he could kill that man.
The savagery that Dempsey displayed had never been seen in a boxing ring before. People couldn't believe it. And that sort of set him off for the Jack Dempsey, the Manasseh Mauler. He was a killer.
Quando Willard tenta se levantar pela 7ª vez, o assalto termina. Mas ninguém percebe. Dempsey corre para o canto e sai do ringue, achando que a luta acabou. A euforia de Dempsey dura 30 segundos. Embora Willard pareça estar liquidado, o assalto termina antes que o árbitro faça a contagem. O empresário de Dempsey, Doc Kearns, manda o boxeador voltar para o ringue.
It was all over. They had to call him back. And then he proceeded for 2 more rounds to beat the daylights out of him. It was just like whipping at a huge punching bag.
Depois de 3 assaltos, Willard estava com o maxilar quebrado, 2 costelas fraturadas e sem 5 dentes. O empresário dele avisa o árbitro que já chega. Jack Dempsey é o campeão mundial dos pesos pesados.
Dempsey's triumph triggered in 1919, the first year after the close of World War I, a new era in sports. It was an era Paul Gallico called the Golden Age of sports. And the first man who was in the pantheon of greats was Jack Dempsey, Babe Ruth, Bill Tilden, Red Grange, and Bobby Jones. But the first, July 4th, 1919, Jack Dempsey.
6 meses depois de nocautear Jess Willard, os anos 20 começaram com vários eventos importantes. Em 16 de janeiro de 1920, a 18ª emenda constitucional, a Lei Seca, se tornou lei. A venda de bebidas tornou-se ilegal. Nesse mesmo dia, a primeira Assembleia da Liga das Nações aconteceu em Paris. Em março, Mary Pickford, a queridinha do cinema, casou-se com Douglas Fairbanks. A 19ª emenda deu direito de voto às mulheres e, em novembro, Warren G. Harding foi eleito presidente dos Estados Unidos. Em meio a tudo isso, Dempsey colocou seu título em jogo apenas 2 vezes nos 2 anos seguintes, nocauteando ambos os adversários. Mas isso era pouco. O público queria um espetáculo à altura da luta entre Willard e Dempsey. O promotor Tex Rickard decidiu fazer uma luta internacional na qual Dempsey enfrentaria o campeão mundial dos pesos meio pesados, Georges Carpentier, da França. Carpentier era um herói de guerra. Para despertar interesse, surgiram as histórias de que Dempsey evitara ser recrutado para a guerra.
Jack got a bad rap in World War I because he was declared ineligible for supporting his family. But he had a very sharp manager named Jack Kearns. So Kearns had him appear at a working site, and they had him with a sledgehammer in his hand and these working clothes on, except his patent leather shoes were showing underneath the pants. It made very bad press for Jack.
Como fez em Toledo, Rickard construiu um outro estádio em Jersey City, Nova Jersey. Foi a primeira luta de boxe milionária. 20 cinegrafistas registraram a luta para a posteridade. O evento também seria o pioneiro na área das comunicações, a primeira transmissão nacional de rádio. Nos primeiros 3 assaltos, a luta está equilibrada, mas no 4º assalto, Dempsey, à esquerda, usa o peso e a força para vencer. Mais uma vez, ele se transforma no tigre que liquidou Willard. Ele manda Carpentier para a lona e a contagem começa. Mas, de repente, Carpentier se levanta. 5 segundos depois, Carpentier é nocauteado. Na arquibancada, estudando o combate, está um jovem boxeador que havia acabado de vencer uma luta. Ele acha que há uma falha no estilo de Dempsey. O nome dele é Gene Tunney.
The more he thought of it, the more convinced he became. But he found that one night when he studied Carpentier, he saw that Dempsey was really a pushover for a right cross, a normal right punch to the jaw. But Dempsey was hard to hit, and he was a man that used to put brine, beef brine, rub it into his face all the time and toughen his skin, so it was hard to lacerate his skin and draw the blood. He used to chew pine, so his jaw just became like iron. It was very hard to knock out Jack Dempsey, extremely hard to land a punch.
2 anos após nocautear Carpentier, Dempsey defenderia o título novamente, vencendo uma luta de 15 assaltos contra Tommy Gibbons. Nesses anos de inatividade, Dempsey foi visto em cinejornais tentando mudar sua imagem de boxeador selvagem. Ele conquistava o público brincando com crianças, fazendo aparições públicas e saindo com astros de Hollywood que o idolatravam. Em um evento beneficente, Charlie Chaplin desafiou Dempsey para uma luta, dizendo que o nocautearia e ficaria com o título. Dempsey divertiu o público enquanto o ator Douglas Fairbanks atuava como árbitro. Chegando por trás, Charlie Chaplin nocauteou o campeão mundial dos pesos pesados. Dempsey havia defendido o título apenas 4 vezes em 4 anos, e o público queria mais. O promotor Tex Rickard decidiu fazer mais uma luta internacional parecida com a do francês Georges Carpentier. Dempsey enfrentaria o campeão da Argentina, Luiz Firpo, que vencera 26 lutas consecutivas, 21 por nocaute. 80 mil fãs lotaram a Arena de Nova York em 14 de setembro de 1923. Um deles era Nat Rossoff, de 13 anos.
Firpo was a wild, swinging boxer. Dempsey was a fighter. He came in advancing, crouched, bobbing and weaving, ready to tear his opponent apart. His whole being, seeing the expression on his face, if you could see his eyes, they were blazing. Couldn't wait to get to his opponent.
Dempsey derruba Firpo várias vezes. Após cair 7 vezes, Firpo reage, fazendo jus ao apelido Touro Selvagem dos Pampas. Ele joga Dempsey para fora do ringue.
He landed in the boxing writer's table, just on the fringe of the ring, and I was sitting about 4 rows back in the ringside, on the side that he came out. I saw the reporters who were sitting there pushing him in the back, helping him back in. Fans were just up on their toes and screaming, and it was a very, very exciting moment. And when he got back into the ring, everyone was on their feet. They figured that Dempsey was going to go back down again, but he didn't.
No segundo assalto, Dempsey continua atacando como no primeiro. Um gancho de esquerda e um soco de direita derrubam Firpo. Após 3 minutos e 57 segundos de luta e 9 quedas, Firpo fica na lona. Jack Dempsey mantém o título.
It was a Babe Ruth home run. It was a Red Grange 100-yard kickoff return. This was excitement. This wasn't safety first. This was safety last. And in the Roaring 20s, and it had become as such, excitement was the name of the game. And Dempsey was feeding it.
Nos 3 anos seguintes, Dempsey não entrou no ringue para defender o título. Em vez disso, ele apareceu em filmes e peças de teatro e casou-se com a atriz Estelle Taylor. Enquanto Dempsey lucrava com o título sem lutar, Gene Tunney ficava famoso, lutando 18 vezes sem perder. Uma luta de 10 assaltos entre Dempsey e Tunney estava marcada para 23 de setembro de 1926, na Filadélfia. O promotor Tex Rickard queria que fosse em Nova York, mas a licença de Dempsey foi revogada em Nova York quando Rickard se recusou a fazer uma luta entre Dempsey e Harry Wills. Rickard pensava que Tunney era um adversário fácil para a primeira luta de Dempsey em mais de 3 anos.
Everybody thought Dempsey would win, never realizing that one man was going down and the other fella was coming up. Tunney had all the characteristics to be a great fighter. He could box. He could take a punch. He knew boxing. He was a good student of boxing. And of course, I didn't think he could lick Dempsey because as good as I think Tunney may be, I don't think he can lick Dempsey.
Desde o começo da luta, fica claro que Tunney, à direita, sabe o que está fazendo. Depois de assistir inúmeros filmes das lutas de Dempsey, ele estava preparado para cada ação do campeão.
We all expected to see Dempsey knock out Tunney. However, the fight didn't go that way. Tunney's superior boxing ability thwarted Dempsey's rushes. He was a counter-puncher. Dempsey would rush in, throwing his punches rather wildly. Tunney would meet him with a left jab, and in the first round, hit him with his right that jarred Dempsey.
Quando a luta termina, a maioria das pessoas acha que Tunney venceu todos os assaltos.
On the day that Tunney beat him, 6 of the 8 columns of the New York Times, page 1, were on the fight. You can't imagine any sporting event now, and this is the New York Times.
Tunney foi recebido como herói em Nova York, sua cidade natal. Milhares de pessoas foram recebê-lo. Mas, ironicamente, Dempsey passou a ser mais amado na derrota do que Tunney na vitória.
Dad had the bad luck to have knocked off the idol of the 20s, when maybe one of the greatest gate draws in the history of sports. And so Dad, the clean-cut guy, comes in with a scientific approach and dances rings around them, and they wonder what's going on here. Maybe, I guess this is just the way the world turns. All great things have to come to an end.
Embora muitos especialistas tenham previsto que a derrota para Tunney seria o fim da carreira dele, Dempsey, aos 31 anos, não concordou. Ele queria uma revanche. Antes disso, ele teria que enfrentar Jack Sharkey. Sharkey ficou famoso ao derrotar Harry Wills, o peso pesado que Rickard não deixara Dempsey enfrentar. Dempsey disse: "Eu quero ter certeza de que meus dias no ringue terminaram. Talvez Sharkey possa me convencer." 10 meses após perder o título para Tunney, Dempsey enfrentou Sharkey no estádio Yankee, em Nova York. Mesmo como ex-campeão, Dempsey ganhou $352 mil. Na época, o jogador de beisebol mais bem pago era Babe Ruth, que recebia apenas $70 mil pela temporada inteira. Durante 6 assaltos, Sharkey faz mais pontos que Dempsey. No 7º assalto, Sharkey, à direita, continua atacando e reclama que Dempsey está desferindo golpes baixos. No meio do assalto, Sharkey se vira para reclamar para o árbitro. Dempsey o acerta com um gancho de esquerda. Muitos pensam que o árbitro Jack O'Sullivan desqualificará Dempsey. Mas após uma breve hesitação, O'Sullivan começa a contagem. Sharkey havia desobedecido a regra principal, proteger-se o tempo todo. Foi um nocaute com um único soco.
He would do anything to win. He was just a mean old critter, as they say down south. But that's the result that he wanted, you know.
Dempsey estava certo de que enfrentaria Tunney novamente e recuperaria o título. A luta estava marcada para 22 de setembro de 1927 no Soldier Field, em Chicago, quase um ano após a primeira luta entre os dois.
Dempsey was still the favorite of the fans and the betting favorite for the second fight, although there shouldn't have been a reason for it. But a lot of people do not bet with their heads. They bet with their hearts. A lot of that money came from Al Capone, who was a big Dempsey fan. At the contract signing for this fight, Dempsey demanded something that had never been in the rules before. Fearing that Tunney would stand over him and beat him, he got up. He asked that a clause be put in that a man go to a neutral corner upon scoring a knockdown, at his insistence.
A segunda luta começa perante mais de 100 mil espectadores, a maioria deles certa de que Dempsey recuperará o título.
The second fight, we expected to see Dempsey tear into Tunney and knock him out. But the second fight appeared to be a repeat of the first. Dempsey advancing and bobbing and weaving and throwing punches from all sides. Tunney calmly backing off mostly and countering Dempsey, keeping him unbalanced until the seventh round.
No começo do assalto, Tunney fica à frente com um soco de direita. Dempsey revida com a direita e a esquerda. Quando Tunney cai sobre as cordas, Dempsey acerta um gancho de esquerda.
Tunney, who heretofore had never been down, ever, sinks, slinks, slides, melts into the canvas. And Dempsey stands in the corner. And Dave Barry, the referee, is first pointing, then yanking to get Dempsey to go across the ring because Tunney has almost fallen in the corner in which Dempsey is standing in. And Dempsey's just looking at his handiwork. He finally goes, the estimate was between 4 and 5 seconds.
Tunney se levanta e consegue vencer a luta. Mas muitos acreditam que Tunney foi salvo pelo que ficou conhecido como a contagem longa.
He's always felt that he could have gotten up in time. It was all a matter of about 4 seconds. If you look at the film, you see that he looked pretty wide awake at the count of 2, 3. But Dad was in phenomenal physical condition. His legs were in the best shape imaginable, and that's why he could get up and dance around and get away from Dempsey. Dempsey couldn't keep up with him.
Tunney foi derrubado no 7º assalto, mas para muitos, esse foi o único assalto que ele perdeu.
And what nobody remembers is Tunney knocks Dempsey down in the 8th round and goes on to finish in a 10-round decision, having won 19 of the 20 rounds between the two. But what everybody remembers is that 20th round, that 7th round, the long count. And it is still probably one of the most famous moments in all of sports.
He accepted defeat gracefully. Never said anything unkind about any opponent. As rough and tough as he was in the ring and mean and cruel, that's how nice and decent he was outside the ring.
Thank you, Bill. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Alguns meses depois da luta, Dempsey se aposentou. Mais uma vez, reverenciado tanto na derrota quanto na vitória. Ele aparecia com políticos em eventos beneficentes e quando decidiu abrir um restaurante em Nova York, o prefeito LaGuardia participou da cerimônia de início das obras. Tunney defendeu o título uma vez no ano seguinte, vencendo Tom Heaney por nocaute técnico. Depois, sem outros mundos para conquistar, ele se aposentou como campeão mundial dos pesos pesados. Apesar das 2 vitórias, Tunney nunca foi idolatrado como Jack Dempsey. Para o público, Dempsey sempre seria o boxeador ideal.
The face of Jack Dempsey set the standard for the prize fighter's face. If you look like Dempsey, they'd take the trainers would look for it, but you get a closer look at you. The Dempsey attitude. And Dempsey was so popular, he was the first glamorous heavyweight champion. And Clark Gable was fashioned after Jack Dempsey to get that manly look. In his whole career, he was Jack Dempsey.
Ao contrário de Dempsey, Tunney parecia mais um professor universitário que um campeão dos pesos pesados.
I think there's no fighter probably in the 20th century that was perhaps more misunderstood than Dad. He was always misjudged, and he was always thought to be not a natural fighter. Then when they found out that Father was also a reader, a closet reader on the side in the 1920s, that didn't go down too well, because to them, readers in that time were dreamers and maybe fools. When you're a boxer and a fighter, you're supposed to look the part and play the part. And I don't think Dad had any intention in playing that role or wanting to conform to that way of thinking.
Na aposentadoria, Tunney e Dempsey continuaram amigos. O respeito mútuo entre eles foi confirmado em Chicago, em 1957, o 30º aniversário da contagem longa. Ambos com mais de 60 anos, eles decidiram provar de uma vez por todas quem era o melhor boxeador. Eles brincaram de lutar boxe sem acertar um só golpe. Depois, enquanto o público gritava, ambos chegaram à mesma conclusão. Era melhor esquecer a luta e passar a noite dançando. Este é o Cemitério Nacional Arlington, o local do descanso final dos grandes heróis americanos. Homens e mulheres reverenciados por suas contribuições ao país na guerra e na paz. É um solo sagrado. As lápides de mármore contam a história dos Estados Unidos. Nenhuma mais dramática que a do homem que criou a história, um ícone homenageado na morte pelo que fez em vida. Perto do túmulo do soldado desconhecido, há um memorial onde está escrito Lewis, o bombardeiro marrom. Campeão mundial dos pesos pesados, 1937 a 1949.
My father's real name is Joe Louis Barrow, and many people didn't realize that. But when he started boxing, he had a very large signature, and when he registered for an amateur bout, he said Joe Louis, and he couldn't get the Barrow on the card. So the fellow there said, just use Louis, it won't matter, it's just a name, just use Joe Louis.
No verão de 1935, o azarão James J. Braddock venceu por unanimidade o campeão dos pesos pesados, Max Baer. A vitória de Braddock foi uma das maiores surpresas na história dos pesos pesados. Mas ninguém esperava que Braddock ficasse com o título por muito tempo. O desafiante seria um boxeador invicto de 21 anos de idade de Detroit, com 22 vitórias consecutivas, 18 delas por nocaute. Ele se chamava Joe Louis. A vitória mais impressionante de Louis foi nocautear o ex-campeão dos pesos pesados, Primo Carneira, no 6º assalto.
The fight world's new sensation, Joe Louis, Detroit Brown Bummer, talks over his astounding knockout of Man Mountain Carnera with dancing champ Bill Robinson and manager Roxburgh.
Joe, you promised to knock Carnera out in the 5th round last night. Now, how about it?
5th round slipped by me last night, so I knocked him out in the 6th round because that's the round he said gonna knock me out in.
Now, what punch did you use to lick him with?
Well, a left hook and a right cross and then the same punch again.
6 semanas depois de derrotar Carneira, Louis enfrentou o adversário mais apavorado que veria em sua vida.
There was a fighter in Miami. His name was King Levinsky. Sold neckties. After. And his sister was his manager. And Jimmy Cannon, the great sports writer, said it's the first time a fighter was ever carried into the ring. He didn't want to fight Louis.
Em 24 de setembro de 1935, Louis nocauteia o ex-campeão Max Baer no 4º assalto, seu terceiro nocaute em 3 meses, somando 25 vitórias consecutivas. Ele é o principal desafiante para o título de Jim Braddock. Enquanto Louis ganhava fama internacional, havia um outro nome conhecido em segundo lugar, o ex-campeão mundial da Alemanha, Max Schmeling. Os dois se enfrentaram no estádio Yankee em 19 de junho de 1936, menos de 2 meses antes dos Jogos Olímpicos de Berlim. Louis era o favorito para derrotar Schmeling e desmentir os nazistas que defendiam a superioridade da raça ariana.
Joe Louis was an undefeated fighter. Nobody could beat him. Along comes this ex-champion from Germany, named Max Schmeling. Joe Louis was making a career of knocking out ex-champions. He had knocked out Primo Carnero, an ex-champion. He had knocked out Max Baer, an ex-champion. Now he was going to knock out Max Schmeling. But Max saw something. And what he saw was something that we all saw in retrospect. Joe Louis, with that perfect stance, when he threw it left, he'd throw to the left and drop it, making it open for a right. And that was a simple little maneuver like that Max Schmeling saw. And Louis did it, but knocked him down.
Louis cai pela primeira vez em sua carreira profissional. Antes do final do quinto assalto, Schmeling desfere mais um soco de direita. Ele acerta em cheio o queixo de Louis. Louis precisa de ajuda para ir até o canto. Na opinião de todos, a luta acabou. Louis mal se lembra dos assaltos seguintes. No 12º assalto, Schmeling termina a luta. Louis vai para a lona e recebe a contagem.
Fighting badly. He is blinking his eyes, shaking his head. The fight is over.
Schmeling volta para a Alemanha no dirigível Hindenburg. Ele é recebido por uma multidão enquanto os nazistas usam Schmeling como um exemplo da supremacia da raça ariana.
He was not a Nazi. He was not a member of the Nazi Party. He once told me, yes, he went to dinner with the Fuhrer. He had been asked 4 times, and you did not turn the Fuhrer down 5. Then he added, I once went to dinner with Franklin Roosevelt. That did not make me a Democrat.
Nos Estados Unidos, a vitória de Schmeling sobre Louis o tornou o principal candidato para desafiar o título de Jim Braddock. Durante vários meses, houve batalhas judiciais para decidir quem seria o desafiante.
Realities are that Joe Louis wanted a shot at the title. And my mother said that he was absolutely devastated when he lost to Max Schmeling in 1936 because he didn't think he'd get another shot at the title.
Surgiram boatos de que, se Schmeling derrotasse Braddock, o título dos pesos pesados não seria mais disputado enquanto o regime de Hitler existisse. Após uma série de manobras judiciais, a equipe de Braddock fez uma proposta. Ele enfrentaria Louis com uma condição. Mesmo que Braddock perdesse, ele receberia 10% dos cachês de Louis e de seus promotores nos 10 anos seguintes. Os jornalistas se referiram a isso como a pensão permanente de Braddock.
Well, I'll tell you, I honestly believe that I'll win by a knockout sometime around the 8th round.
1 ano e 3 dias depois de ter sido nocauteado por Schmeling, Louis seria o primeiro peso pesado negro desde Jack Johnson a disputar o título depois de mais de 22 anos.
The 1937 fight between Louis and Braddock was a major fight in several respects. Joe Louis, a sensation, was challenging, who not incidentally was black. And he carried hopes of people, the black communities. And Braddock was no slouch. He knocked Louis down in the first round and put up a fairly good fight.
No 8º assalto, Joe Louis entra para a história. Joe Louis torna-se o campeão mundial dos pesos pesados.
It's uncanny throughout the history of the heavyweight division. There are moments when history and pure boxing intersect. It happened with Jack Johnson in his confrontation with the Great White Hope. It certainly happened with Joe Louis, which both electrified the black community and also made a huge population of white people stand up and take notice.
Em seguida, Louis teve 3 vitórias fáceis, mas ele disse que não seria um verdadeiro campeão até vencer Max Schmeling.
My father personally told me that he didn't feel or wouldn't have felt that he would have ever been the heavyweight champion had he not had a rematch with Max Schmeling, because there would have been this cloud on his title. And for him, it was very important for him to erase that cloud.
New York, heavyweight boxing news. World champion Joe Louis and challenger Max Schmeling signed for their title bout in June. Max KO'd Joe the last time they met.
I'm going to be in the best of shape, and I'm sure there's going to be a very good fight.
And how about you, Max?
I'm happy that I have the chance again to fight for the title. And I hope the best man may win.
Politicamente, o mundo estava tumultuado. Os exércitos de Hitler avançavam. A Segunda Guerra Mundial começaria em pouco mais de um ano.
It was all set up so that these two, Schmeling and Lewis, could meet. This time, Lewis as a champion and Schmeling as the former champion who already dethroned Lewis and knew his number and everything else. And what made the cheese more binding was that it was a world event. It was the United States against Germany. Uncle Sam against Hitler. What a setting.
There were riots and parades in streets. There actually were people who didn't want that second fight between Lewis and Schmeling to happen and tried to boycott it and had pickets around Yankee Stadium so people couldn't get in. There was a fervor to that we can't understand today.
And they got to the ring right together with Arthur Dillon.
Joe Louis was like music. And he moved slowly. He was almost like fast, slow motion. You could see what he was doing. He'd feint guys. He's always in pursuit. He was always hunting. He was always looking for that spot. Let him have it, you're going.
Nos primeiros minutos, Louis prende Schmeling contra as cordas. Depois acerta o queixo dele com a direita. Depois, Louis continua com socos de esquerda e com uma direita no rim. Schmeling está indefeso. O árbitro Donovan manda Louis para o canto e inicia a contagem.
Joe came out of his corner, approached Schmeling and hit him so hard. Schmeling went down with a scream that you could hear throughout the ringside. I thought that his neck had been broken.
Now Max with his back to the rope. Lewis, a left to Max's jaw. And Donovan is watching carefully. Lewis measures him right to the body. A left hook to the jaw. And Schmeling is down. The count is 5.
O canto de Schmeling joga a toalha mostrando que o lutador estava liquidado.
The whole country rejoiced. We were all one, blacks and whites together and celebrating this. That's what made it so good.
Jimmy Cannon, who was a major force on the scene then as a writer, and a friend of Lewis's, went into his dressing room before the fight and said, "Joe, I picked you in 5 rounds." Lewis, then having his hands wrapped, so his hand was like this, was able to extract the thumb and go 1 round.
The time, 2 minutes, 4 seconds. First round, referee stops it, the winner and still champion, Joe Louis.
Louis tirou o resto do ano de folga. Depois ele defendeu o título com facilidade 2 vezes no começo de 1939. Pouco mais de 1 ano após conquistar o título, ele enfrentou um desafiante improvável. 2 toneladas, Tony Galento, um barman baixinho e fora de forma de Nova Jersey.
Tony, how do you feel after the workout today?
I feel swell. I can kill this guy Lewis right now.
Well, you better. I'll knock you out.
No começo da luta, Galento derruba Louis. E a multidão pensa que um novo campeão está nascendo. Seria uma derrota mais humilhante para Louis do que a primeira luta contra Schmeling.
Tony Galento was indomitable spirit. After the fight, I had him in 2 movies, and Tony would look like a stuck pig at the end of the fight. Tony was still saying, "Oh, that bum, Joe Louis is a bum." And one of the rematch, I could knock him out. He's a bum. He kept saying that to the end. It was ridiculous, absurd, but there was something sort of marvelous about it.
A palavra vagabundo, usada por Galento, tornou-se parte de uma frase usada para descrever os adversários de Louis. Depois de defender o título 4 vezes em 1940, com 3 nocautes e 1 decisão, em 1941 surgiu o Clube do Vagabundo do Mês. A partir de janeiro, Louis lutou 5 vezes, 1 vez por mês, somando 4 nocautes. Em 18 de junho de 1941, Louis enfrentaria o 6º adversário em 6 meses. Ele se chamava Billy Conn.
Over in Khan's camp, Jimmy Braddock, the ex-champ, drops by to get the real lowdown. Listening in, we hear...
Well, how are you going to bring that fighter back to the Irish, Phil?
Well, I'll bring it back with this left hand, Jim. And this.
This was not a member of the Bum of the Month Club. Billy Conn had been light heavyweight champion. And for 12 rounds, after giving away maybe the first 3 out of sheer fright, then figuring he could handle a bigger Joe Louis. Jab, move, clinched, in and out, in and out. Back in the 12th round, he hurt the big jabbers out of Louis. Rocked him. Lifted his foot from the canvas with a left, right, and uppercut.
And Billy Conn went back to his corner and he said, hey, I can beat this guy. Now his corner's telling Billy, wait a minute. You're ahead on every judge's card. Just last the 15th round. Get to the 15th round, you're the heavyweight champion. And so in the 13th round, Billy Conn tried to go toe-to-toe, duke it out with the Brown Bomber.
The point was you moved on Louis. You did not stand and tried to trade punches with him. Conn, who had moved, now decided he would trade. Bad decision.
And he understood then and there and forever what the Brown Bomber was all about, because my father knocked him out cold in the 13th round. Well, you go to their dressing rooms afterwards and you see photographs of my father afterwards, and Joe Louis had these towels over him. His face was swelled. Billy Conn just beat the devil out of him for 12 rounds.
Afterwards, Conn was asked in his dressing room by Jesse Abramson, Billy, you had to fight. Why did you do what you did in the 13th round? Conn's answer, what's the sense of being Irish if you can't be stupid?
Bruiser Kennard made the tackle. We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press.
Here is what has happened. President Roosevelt phoned Secretary Ali half an hour ago that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor, the United States naval base on Oahu Island in the Hawaiian Islands. This means that war is underway between Japan and the United States.
Com a guerra declarada, o boxe queria provar sua importância para elevar o moral americano. Louis e o promotor Mike Jacobs tiveram uma ideia. Eles marcariam uma nova luta com Bud Bear e doariam o dinheiro para a Sociedade de Auxílio Naval. Desta vez, Louis nocauteia Bear no primeiro assalto. No dia seguinte, ele se alista no exército. Campeão se alista para enfrentar japoneses.
Joe Louis answers Uncle Sam's call to arms, donating his last purse, $70,000, to Navy Relief. He's now ready for the sergeant. What's your name, Joe? My name is John Louis Barrow.
Louis era amado pelos americanos por sua generosidade, humildade e patriotismo.
We're going to do our part and we will win because we are on God's side. Thank you.
As contribuições de Louis para as entidades de auxílio da Marinha e do Exército somaram mais de $100 mil, que hoje equivaleriam mais de $1 milhão. Mas a generosidade acabou prejudicando Louis. Ele não sabia que suas doações eram consideradas como renda pessoal passível de impostos. Todos os esforços para marcar uma nova luta com Conn foram recusados pelo Departamento de Guerra. Mas isso não manteve Louis fora do ringue. O exército o fez rodar o mundo fazendo exibições para as tropas americanas. Quando foi dispensado do exército em outubro de 1945, Louis já havia feito 96 exibições e percorrido 113 mil quilômetros. Em quase 4 anos de serviço militar, o campeão não ganhou um centavo, mas sua dívida com a Receita Federal era mais de $100 mil.
There are a lot of stories about my father and the IRS. There's no question that the deductions could have been allowed. They chose not to. In spite of all of that, in spite of the bureaucracy, in spite of the meter running on the interest of what he owed, no one person, no one organization, no one bureaucracy could bring Joe Louis off the pedestal that this country placed him on. He was the champ in everyone's mind. He was the hero in everyone's mind.
Louis lutou 2 vezes em 1946, nocauteando Billy Conn no 8º assalto da luta de revanche. E 3 meses depois, ele liquidou Tammy Mauriello no primeiro assalto. Mas ele estava ficando sem adversários à sua altura. Por fim, apareceu um peso pesado desconhecido, Jersey Joe Walcott.
Jersey Joe Walcott was no stiff. Jersey Joe Walcott was a real good prize fighter. Jersey Joe Walcott had been a sparring partner of Lewis's. But Jersey Joe Walcott was one of those who couldn't get a fight then among the heavyweights. But after the war, Joe Louis ran out of opponents. And in 1947, he signed to fight Jersey Joe Walcott in the Garden, Madison Square Garden.
Embora Louis estivesse parado há mais de um ano, ele era o favorito nas apostas em 20-1. Mas Walcott derruba Louis 2 vezes. Uma no primeiro assalto e outra no 4º assalto. Além de derrubar Louis, Walcott é mais rápido. Jornalistas e fãs acham que se ambos estiverem de pé no 15º e último assalto, Louis perderá o título. Louis está humilhado. Ele acha que levou uma surra de Walcott.
The winner by majority vote and still the heavyweight champion of the world, Joe Louis.
Well, the decision comes in and it's given to, out of force of habit, I guess it's given to Joe Louis.
Em uma decisão dividida, Louis mantém o título.
As it turns out, my father was disappointed, almost embarrassed. But in his true character, he set up a rematch at his own desire because he didn't want to have any questions, any clouds about whether he was champion or not.
Desta vez, o velho Louis retorna. Ele nocauteia o Walcott no 11º assalto. 8 meses mais tarde, Louis anunciou sua aposentadoria. Com o título à disposição, 2 desafiantes lutam por ele. Ezra Charles se torna campeão ao derrotar Jersey Joe Walcott em 15 assaltos. Surgiram boatos de que Louis precisava de dinheiro e que voltaria a lutar. Se recuperasse o título, Louis se tornaria o primeiro homem a sair da aposentadoria e recuperar o título de campeão.
But I feel good. I'm in great condition, and beside I welcome Sam some money.
Favorito para recuperar o título, Louis é derrotado em 15 assaltos. A pontuação mostra que Louis venceu apenas 3 assaltos. Mesmo assim, Louis continua lutando, vencendo 8 lutas em 1950 e 1951. Ainda endividado, um cachê de $300 mil convenceu Louis a enfrentar um boxeador jovem e invicto, Rocky Marciano.
Whether the debt was correct or not, whether they gave penalties at an inordinate rate or not, the fact is Joe Louis loved this country, recognized he owed them money, and he was going to do the only thing he could to repay the taxes, and that was fight Marciano.
Em retrospectiva, parece incrível que Louis tenha sido o favorito na luta contra Marciano. A luta é um massacre. Louis se esforça para que pareça uma luta.
The stories there simply are that Rocky Marciano didn't want to fight my father. My father was Rocky Marciano's hero, and growing up in Brockton, he really believed in the spirit of Joe Louis and the coming from poverty to success. Rocky's people said, if you ever want to be on the caliber of a Joe Louis in the history of boxing, if you have an opportunity to fight him, you should.
I think the saddest and almost teary-eyed sight was watching Joe Louis lying outside the bottom rope in Madison Square Garden after he'd been knocked out by Rocky Marciano.
At the end of the fight, the stories were that Rocky Marciano came into my father's dressing room to apologize and he had tears in his eyes. And my father consoled him and said, Rocky, the best man won. It's okay.
Aos 37 anos, Louis se aposentou novamente, mas a Receita Federal ainda o perseguia. Contra a vontade de amigos e familiares, ele se tornou lutador de luta livre. Depois ele começou a tomar drogas pesadas e a ter alucinações de que pessoas queriam matá-lo. O trabalho dele como recepcionista de um hotel de Las Vegas provocou críticas de muitos jornalistas.
My father loved Las Vegas. It was because of Las Vegas that he felt a sense of worth himself. He created wonderful friendships with Frank Sinatra and Berry Gordy and others through Las Vegas. The fight game grew under my father's realm in Las Vegas, and so he was happy there.
Em 12 de abril de 1981, Joe Louis sofreu um infarto fulminante e morreu um mês antes de completar 67 anos. Celebridades do mundo todo foram ao enterro dele em Las Vegas.
I love what he was, and I love what he is. A statue of our times, an example for men of all ages and all colors. He is now and will always be the champ of my prayers. God bless you, Joe. The fight's over, and you walked out of the ring with dignity and decency.
Alguns dias mais tarde, ele foi enterrado no Cemitério Nacional Arlington, o local do descanso final dos heróis. E era assim que devia ser. Pois Joe Louis foi um herói americano. Este é Muhammad Ali, em sua fazenda no sul do Michigan. Ele sempre começa o dia da mesma maneira, acordando às 5 da manhã para rezar, praticando sua devoção à fé muçulmana. Embora ele não consiga falar ou se mover bem, a mente dele continua lúcida. Muhammad Ali se aposentou do boxe em 1981. Ele continua sendo uma das pessoas mais famosas do mundo e seu passado polêmico ainda é alvo de debates. Um jornalista disse: "Você não pode escrever a história de Muhammad Ali sem contar a história dos Estados Unidos nas últimas décadas do século XX."
If Sonny Liston whoops me, I'll kiss his feet in the rain. I'm not out of the rain on my knees. Tell him he's the greatest and catch the next jet out of the country.
Em 5 de novembro de 1963, o campeão dos pesos pesados Charles Sonny Liston e Cassius Clay se encontraram em Denver para marcar a luta pelo título. Sonny Liston, de 35 anos, é um ex-presidiário com longa ficha criminal e envolvimento com a máfia. Ele só perdeu uma vez em seus 11 anos de carreira. O objetivo de Liston nesta luta é calar o jovem boxeador que a imprensa chamava de falador de Louisville e Cassius Gasoso.
Well, 100% will be coming to see me, but 99% will be coming to see me get beat.
You really feel that?
Because they think I talk too much. But I got these.
And they represent your thinking?
These represent dynamite. There he is.
Cassius Clay, que passaria a ser conhecido como Muhammad Ali, é o campeão olímpico de 1960, com uma carreira excelente, 19 vitórias e nenhuma derrota. Durante vários meses, Clay persegue Liston, a quem chama de urso feio. Seja enfrentando Liston na rua ou no treino, o objetivo de Clay é simples: irritar o peso pesado mais cruel dos últimos tempos.
It's gonna take a good man to whoop me. You can look at me, I'm loaded with confidence. I can't beat me. I had 180 amateur fights, 22 professional fights, and I'm pretty as a girl.
Well, he got himself really worked up to scare Liston, to make him Liston think that he was a nut, that he was crazy. That was his act. Because bullies in jail are scared of nobody except a crazy person. A crazy person doesn't care what you do to him, he's going to put a knife in you. And Liston understood that from his little stay in prison. He looked at Ali like, this guy's crazy. No matter what I do to this guy, he's going to keep coming.
And of course you call Liston the bear.
Yeah, the bear, he's an hibernation.
As atitudes de Clay lembram as de um outro artista, o lutador de luta livre dos anos 40 e 50, Gorgeous George.
Gorgeous George told him, dress all in white. That's going to irritate the shit out of everybody. They're going to want to see your butt on its white duff there. You're almost making fun of them to dress all in white. Say things that irritate people. Because just as many people buy tickets They want to see you get killed as they're rooting for you. Either way, it's $5 in the seat.
Quando Cassius Clay e Sonny Liston entram no ringue em 25 de fevereiro de 1964, Liston é o favorito. Mais de 90% dos jornalistas acreditam que Liston vencerá Clay. Muitos acham que Clay não passará do primeiro assalto.
When you see the young Cassius Clay, you basically want him to lose because he's such a fool. And then when he gets in the ring, it's like he's a different man. He's so good. Then you want him to win. And he's so fast that you almost can't believe your eyes. And Sonny Liston was just dazzling.
Contrariando os céticos e suas próprias dúvidas, Clay sobrevive ao primeiro assalto.
Liston didn't know what to make of it. He was scared of what he was up against. And, you can psych out your opponent. Ali used to psych them out. I mean, can you imagine being in the ring, waiting for Ali to come in, and when you see him coming in, he's giving an interview to a radio man as he's walking to the ring. Well, what does that do to a man waiting? He said, well, he's not a bit worried about me, is he? He's giving an interview.
No quarto assalto, Liston se cansa. Clay continua na ofensiva. No canto, Clay tem problemas de visão. Há suspeitas de que as luvas de Liston foram ilegalmente tratadas com uma substância que cega. Clay implora ao treinador Angelo Dundee que pare a luta.
Cut the gloves off. I want to prove to the world there's dirty work afoot. I said, sit down. I started washing it. Put my finger in his eye, though. Checked it out. Put it in my eye. It burns.
Eles temem que o árbitro interrompa a luta.
Finally, when the 10-second buzzer sounds, I'm relieved. And I only gave one instruction. I said, run. And that's what he did. He ran for a half a round, tear ducts, cleaned out his vision, and he started slapping the guy around again.
Liston não consegue tirar vantagem do problema de visão de Clay. Então Clay intensifica o ataque. No sexto assalto, Clay domina o exausto campeão. Os boxeadores retornam aos campos. Há confusão no lado de Liston. Sonny Liston se recusa a entrar para o sétimo assalto. Ele alega contusão no ombro. A luta termina. Cassius Clay é o novo campeão mundial dos pesos pesados.
I would have slept in a hollow log and drunk muddy water before I would have said he had any type of chance in that fight. And I thought Sonny Liston would be heavyweight champion at least for one more millennium, maybe two. I saw no way that Ali could win that fight.
He said my record's so bad he had to go to the hospital, and I'm still pretty. What you gonna say about that, huh? You're the greatest. Who's the greatest?
No dia seguinte, Cassius Clay anuncia o que vinha sendo comentado há meses.
Cassius is not my name no more. Officially Muhammad Ali now. Muhammad Ali, right. Muhammad Ali. That's my name.
Muhammad Ali abraçou a fé muçulmana e a nação islâmica. Ele fica sem lutar por mais de um ano. Em vez disso, ele prega a palavra da nação islâmica pelas cidades americanas, promovendo a segregação racial e o pacifismo.
Angel food cake is the white cake, but the devil food cake is the chocolate cake.
Hatred is not a word that Ali knows. The only time in his life he ever used the words when he first got in with the Muslims and they were a hate group. And he was uncomfortable with it, and he was never the same, and he wasn't a good person. Right after the Liston fight, he turned into someone we hadn't seen before, someone we didn't like.
We look at all the angels, we see white with blonde hair and blue eyes. Now, I'm sure if there's a heaven in the sky and the colored folks die and go to heaven, where are the colored angels? They must be in the kitchen preparing the milk and honey.
Well, remember one thing about Muhammad Ali. He was 23, 24 years old. He was a kid. So if he didn't express himself with the consistency of Thomas Jefferson at times, so what? He was not leading the civil rights movement in Selma and Birmingham. He was a kid.
Em 25 de maio de 1965, 15 meses depois da primeira luta entre Clay e Liston, uma nova luta é marcada em Lewiston, Maine.
What are we gonna do, Drew? We're gonna float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. Oh, rumble, young man, rumble. Oh, That's our motto.
A tensão é grande. Os jornais publicam que membros do crime organizado e a nação islâmica ameaçaram a vida de ambos os boxeadores. Em meio a tudo isso, Cassius Clay entra no ringue pela primeira vez como Muhammad Ali. Apesar de ser o campeão dos pesos pesados, ele não é o favorito. O árbitro da luta é o ex-campeão mundial dos pesos pesados, Jersey Joe Walcott. Muhammad Ali só consegue acertar 2 socos. Ali desfere um soco de direita. Liston cai. Ali grita com o adversário caído. O árbitro tenta afastá-lo de Liston. Ele teme que Ali ataque Liston enquanto ele levanta. Segundo as regras do boxe, Walcott não pode começar a contagem antes que Ali vá para o canto neutro.
Ali should have been disqualified. Get to the neutral corner and get disqualified. Like 17 seconds he was on the floor. He got up and they start fighting. And so a guy from the audience comes in and stops it.
Nat Fleischer, o chefe dos jornalistas do boxe, diz ao Walcott que a luta deveria acabar, já que Liston ficou mais de 10 segundos no chão. Walcott o ouve e encerra a luta. Em 2 minutos e 12 segundos, Muhammad Ali manteve o título dos pesos pesados. O público grita marmelada. Todos discutem como um dos melhores boxeadores da história poderia ter sido nocauteado com um soco, o soco fantasma.
That's baloney. The guy didn't see the punch. The guy had his face facing the canvas. He never knew the shot was coming. He hit him on the temple, and he was disoriented there.
He got hit hard. I hit him with a punch that Jack Johnson used called the anchor punch.
Muhammad Ali defenderia o título com sucesso mais 8 vezes entre 1965 e 1967. Mas ele se envolve ainda mais em outro mundo, o tumulto político e social que assola os Estados Unidos nos anos 60. Seus pronunciamentos pró-negros assustam e confundem muitos americanos brancos. Sua oposição à guerra irrita muitos outros quando os Estados Unidos intensificam a participação no Vietnã. Em 1966, mais de 150 mil soldados americanos lutavam no Vietnã e mais dezenas de milhares estavam a caminho. Muhammad Ali, que não passou no exame militar em 1964, não pode ser convocado.
I don't expect Einstein to be the heavyweight champion, and I don't expect Muhammad Ali to be Einstein. He is a genius of a different kind. There are physical geniuses. There are geniuses of character. And I think Ali had genius in both those areas.
I've always maintained if Muhammad Ali had been educated up to his potential, the world would never have heard of him. He would have been a doctor or an accountant, or he may even been a politician, who knows? But he wouldn't have been a boxer.
Em 1966, o exército diminuiu o número de pontos necessários para a convocação. Muhammad Ali, antes considerado inapto para servir, agora é reclassificado como 1A.
I'm 1A without any test, without notifying me or checking to see if I'm any wiser than I was the last time or any worse.
Os advogados de Ali pedem um deferimento militar dizendo que Muhammad Ali é um sacerdote muçulmano. O pedido é recusado.
I will not go 10,000 miles from here to help murder and kill another poor people simply to continue the domination of white slave masters over the darker people of the earth.
And here's this black man standing up, only in his 20s, young black man saying, I got no quarrel with the Viet Cong. He said, no Viet Cong ever called me nigger.
Em 28 de abril de 1967, Muhammad Ali é chamado pelo Centro de Recrutamento do Exército em Houston. Ele é chamado 3 vezes para se apresentar. Ele se recusa 3 vezes.
Mr. Muhammad Ali has just refused to be inducted into the United States Armed Forces.
Indiciado e condenado por não atender à convocação, Ali é condenado a 5 anos de prisão. Ele permanece livre durante as apelações. O Departamento de Estado americano confisca o passaporte dele. O FBI passa a vigiá-lo. As organizações de boxe tiram os títulos dele. As licenças de boxe de Ali são revogadas, impedindo-o de lutar e de se sustentar.
I know what I'm gonna say. Can my title be taken without me being whooped? No!
Líderes da comunidade negra, incluindo o reverendo Martin Luther King, o apoiam.
The draft is very clear. I'm against it. And I think the sooner our country does away with the draft, the better it will be for everybody.
Mas para outros americanos, as atitudes de Ali são vistas com desdém e repugnância. Entre eles está Jackie Robinson, ex-jogador de beisebol que rompeu a barreira racial em 1947.
Cassius has made millions of dollars off of the American public. And now he's not willing to show his appreciation to a country that is giving him, in my view, a fantastic opportunity. Hurts a great deal.
Muhammad Ali não se esconde. Ele continua discursando em universidades.
The most persecuted. I'm not allowed to work in America. I'm not allowed to leave America. Home of the brave, land of the free. Not allowed to.
Ele tenta até ser ator, fazendo o papel principal na peça Buck White, na Broadway.
Ali scraped by, made speeches and got fees. It was a very, very tough period in his life. And Ali had to resort to a lot of devices to keep bread on his table for his, growing family.
No comment.
Enquanto os advogados tentam anular a condenação, o estado da Geórgia concede uma licença para Ali lutar. Em 26 de outubro de 1970, Ali entra no ringue depois de 3 anos e meio e marca um nocaute técnico em Jerry Quarry em 3 assaltos. A ameaça de uma longa condenação ainda existe, mas o de Ali do boxe, que começou em 1967, chegou ao fim. Ansioso por reconquistar o título que lhe foi tomado 4 anos antes, Muhammad desafia o novo campeão mundial, Joe Frazier. A luta que aconteceu em 18 de maio de 1971 ainda é chamada de a luta do século. Joe Frazier está no auge da carreira. Seu histórico é perfeito: 26 vitórias, nenhuma derrota e 23 nocautes. Durante semanas, Ali atormenta Frazier, chamando-o de boxeador dos brancos e campeão substituto.
He's gonna talk to me. Ain't that some nerve? He's gonna talk to me. That's gonna be one heck of a talking night.
20 mil fãs lotam o Madison Square Garden em Nova York. Outros 300 milhões assistem pela TV. Nenhuma luta havia sido tão esperada.
Every celebrity who was around at the time was at that fight. People forget that Frank Sinatra was so anxious to get close to the action. He got a photographer's credential and shot pictures for Life magazine. So he was right up on the apron. I mean, that's the sort of effect that fight had on people.
Se Ali derrotar Frazier, ele será o único peso pesado a recuperar o título ao lado de Floyd Patterson.
Ali had not been fighting for some years, and when he came back, again, he was the underdog, so to speak. And he talked about his opponents in ways that made them out to be the white man's favorite. So that when he went in the ring, he had all of black America behind him, and it would be a triumph for blacks.
No 11º assalto, Joe Frazier atordou a Ali com um gancho de esquerda. Ali fica desnorteado, mas consegue continuar. Embora exausto, Ali continua lutando. Ele não quer cair.
Ali was sent out, told he had to knock Frazier out in the 15th round. And he's screaming at Frazier, "Fool, go down. You cannot stand up. God has ordained me to win this fight. Go down. Go down. You cannot stand against God." At which point, Frazier slips a punch, throws a left hook, and just before he throws it, says, "Well, God's going to get his ass whipped tonight." Bang, down goes Ali.
A luta termina. Joe Frazier vence Muhammad Ali por unanimidade e mantém o título de campeão dos pesos pesados. Depois, ambos os boxeadores são hospitalizados. Joe Frazier ficaria internado durante 2 semanas. Embora tenha perdido a decisão no ringue, Muhammad Ali vence a batalha contra o governo americano 3 meses mais tarde. Em 28 de junho de 1971, o Supremo Tribunal anula a condenação de Ali ao saber que o FBI havia grampeado o telefone dele. Muhammad Ali é finalmente vingado.
And the reason I didn't go to jail out Vietnam was the FBI, CIA followed me. They eavesdropped, Watergate, and heard me on phone calls. Sent girls on me and set traps up for me. They found that I was serious.
America opened their doors and their arms to this guy and said, "You're right. We shouldn't be in Vietnam. You're absolutely right. You're willing to give up being the champion of the world and go to jail? That's sure that you're right." I mean, who would do that? Who would give up millions of dollars, fame, and everything you work for a political belief? Few people.
Muhammad Ali lutaria mais 13 vezes, de 1971 a 1973. Nesse período, ele venceu 12 lutas e perdeu uma. Ele perdeu para Ken Norton, que quebrou seu maxilar. Em 1974, Muhammad Ali lutaria novamente com Joe Frazier, vencendo por unanimidade no Madison Square Garden. Mas desta vez, Frazier não é mais o campeão. George Foreman é o detentor do título mundial. No país africano do Zaire, Muhammad Ali prevê que recuperará o título dos pesos pesados, nocauteando George Foreman, o peso pesado mais cruel e violento desde Sonny Liston.
When George Foreman meets me, he'll pay his debt. I can drown a drink of water and kill a dead tree. Wait till you see Muhammad Ali.
Depois que Mobutu, o presidente do Zaire, prometeu um cachê de $10 milhões, a primeira disputa do título dos pesos pesados a ser realizada na África é marcada.
What was Zaire like? Everything you could possibly think that could go wrong, went wrong with the fight, including running out of money. It took a stadium that wasn't a stadium. Couldn't buy tickets for it because they had no chairs, no aisles, no rows. How do you seat people in a thing like that? So a lot of people died there. A lot of people died. About 13 that I can remember counting up were shot by Mobutu for not doing their job right.
Na madrugada de 30 de outubro de 1974, Ali e Foreman finalmente se enfrentam. Foreman é o favorito. Muitos acreditam que seus socos poderosos que liquidaram Frazier e Norton em menos de 2 assaltos também destruirão Ali.
The most bizarre fight I've ever covered. In the middle of the jungle, people forget what time that fight started to tie in with American time for prime-time television. But it started at 4 a.m. Can you imagine people fighting each other at 4 a.m.?
No começo do segundo assalto, Muhammad Ali recua. O treinador Angelo Dundee e outros assistentes gritam para que Ali saia das cordas. Ele não ouve.
I was scared to death. I mean, every round I was scared to death. When he started that rope-a-dope routine, I'm whacking him on the butt. Get the hell off of there!
After the 4th round, when Ali really lands about 4 or 5 combinations on George and leaves him stunned, he comes back to the corner and he says, "Well, I got him now. I can knock him out if I want." And Angelo says, "Well, do it." You know what I mean? Like, "Hey, let's get out of here. It's going to rain." He says, "No, I'm going to have a little fun first."
Ali entra decidido no 8º assalto. George Foreman cai. É feita a contagem. Muhammad Ali recuperou o título de campeão dos pesos pesados. Em 1975, John Frazier e Muhammad Ali concordaram em lutar pela 3ª vez nas Filipinas, na Trilla em Manila. Ambos os boxeadores demonstram a idade que têm. Os anos de luta os desgastaram. Mesmo assim, o público quer esta revanche. Muhammad Ali provoca comoção. Mais uma vez, as atitudes dele irritam e constrangem John Frazier.
When I get the gorilla in Manila,
Ali could sell a fight.
And sometimes he denigrated or appeared to denigrate the opponent. He tried to infuriate Frazier because when you infuriate your opponent, he doesn't think clearly and makes mistakes.
Quando soa o gongo, Muhammad Ali e Joe Frazier correm para o centro do ringue.
What made that fight so great is Frazier's almost knocked out in the first round. And then Frazier comes back. It's a constant ebb and flow, and you say, my God, how much longer are these two guys going to be able to stand toe-to-toe and do this? And I saw two guys in an arena with no air conditioning. I don't think I've led an exemplary life, and when I get to hell, I will know what to expect, because that's what it'll feel like. Like that arena felt that day at high noon in Manila, where the boiling point just percolated over. Everybody was melting in their seats.
Nos 13 assaltos seguintes, eles continuam se espancando.
I don't know how those two guys survived, I swear to God. I mean, I was exhausted just climbing up and down the steps. So I thought Muhammad was completely spent. But he sucked it up, brought it from nowhere.
When it looked like Frazier was going to be licked, he came back and threw the damnedest right hand he had ever thrown. And Ali said, "Fool, you don't have any right hand. You're an old man. They told me you're an old man." They're going to hit him with another right hand. And then it's a fight, and it was a fight he had not bargained for.
No 14º assalto, Ali e Frazier mal podem se mover.
Frazier is out. He can't see. He can't breathe. He's out. Ali is 3 feet away from him. Can't walk the 3 feet to throw the punch that will end the fight.
Joe had taken so much punches that he really should not have come out again. And in our corner, we were just saying, I hope he doesn't come out. I hope we don't have to do what we're going to have to do. Which is going to be killed.
O treinador Eddie Futch cuida de Frazier.
And then it's Eddie Futch who makes the decision, and wisely so, that we got to stop this because it can't go on. It cannot go on a 15th round. Someone will get hurt, and it's not going to be my fighter. And he cuts the gloves off. And Joe never forgave Eddie Futch for saying no. And as far as I'm concerned, he should never stop thanking him for saying no.
Enquanto tentava consolar Joe Frazier, Eddie Futch disse: "Ninguém esquecerá o que você fez aqui esta noite."
The fight that has created a situation where Ali looks at Frazier and Frazier looks at Ali, and if you use the names, they are linked forever. You cannot use one's name without the other, because when Ali walked out of that ring supported by like 20 guys, and he came out and he leaned over to where all of us were sitting, and he said, "That's the closest you will ever see to death." And he was right.
Ambos os boxeadores estão péssimos. Frazier passa a noite na escuridão. Seus olhos estão inchados demais. A situação de Ali não é muito melhor.
I don't know no other fighter today besides myself who could beat Joe Frazier.
He made this tragic discovery that he could take a punch, and so the cumulative effect was extraordinary, and it took a terrible, terrible toll on him after a while. In other words, he won, but he lost.
De 1976 a 1977, Ali defendeu o título 6 vezes com sucesso. Mas um ex-cabo dos fuzileiros navais, chamado Leon Spinks, seria uma das maiores surpresas da história recente dos pesos pesados. Em 15 de fevereiro de 1978, Spinks surpreende um Muhammad Ali fora de forma, vencendo em 15 assaltos. Logo depois, a imprensa e amigos de Ali sugerem que ele se aposente aos 36 anos de idade. A idade e as lutas épicas contra Foreman e Frazier parecem ter acabado com sua vontade de lutar. A saúde dele apresenta problemas. A fala e os reflexos estão mais lentos. Uma revanche com Spinks é marcada para 7 meses depois, em New Orleans. Não há um favorito. Se Ali vencer, ele será o primeiro peso pesado a conquistar o título mundial 3 vezes.
Ali decided, I guess, he was going to wake up his own echoes, and did. But those echoes were becoming dimmer and dimmer and dimmer.
No decorrer da luta, a emoção aumenta. Embora o combate continue arrastado, muitos sentem que esta noite entrará para a história. Soa o gongo final. A luta termina. Muhammad Ali vence por unanimidade e torna-se o primeiro peso pesado a recuperar o título 3 vezes. Seria a última vitória de Muhammad Ali no ringue. Ele se aposenta logo depois. Ele volta a lutar, mas sofre 2 derrotas humilhantes.
What was sad was the Larry Holmes fight. And there was no way he was going to win. And even Holmes, who had trained under him, who had adored him, didn't want to hit him. He'd keep looking around at the referee.
Finalmente, em 1981, Muhammad Ali se aposenta de uma vez por todas, aos 39 anos, encerrando uma das eras mais gloriosas do boxe. Os anos seguintes foram difíceis para Muhammad Ali. A generosidade e os maus negócios do boxeador lhe custaram milhões de dólares. A habilidade motora e a fala de Ali continuaram piorando. O diagnóstico do mal de Parkinson confirmou o que muitos temiam. Muhammad Ali suportava tudo, mais lento e calado que antes, mas com dignidade e compaixão. Em 19 de julho de 1996, a cerimônia de abertura dos Jogos Olímpicos de Atlanta está chegando ao clímax. A nadadora americana Janet Evans sobe a rampa que leva à pira olímpica. Quem a espera é Muhammad Ali.
Muhammad Ali lighting the torch is one of the great sporting moments I witnessed. And when Ali was suddenly standing there with that torch, I'm not ashamed to admit it, that I fought back tears.
Everybody's supposed to feel sorry for him. You can't feel sorry for him. The guy's a star. He is a champion. He is showing people that have Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and other diseases, you don't give up. You keep right on going. He loves people, and he wants them to love him. I call it Ali World.